Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Police Foundation's Friday Exchange. I'm Rick Muir, I'm Director of the Police Foundation, and we're delighted this morning that we've got with us Gavin Stephens, who's Chair of the National Police Chiefs Council. Thank you very much, Gavin, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Good morning. Nice to see everybody.
And the reason for doing this, or the sort of prompt for doing it, is that it's actually the 10th anniversary of the National Police Chiefs Council, and so we thought it'd be a good time to reflect on those 10 years, and also kind of look ahead to all the issues around police reform which are on the agenda. So in a moment, I'm going to be starting that conversation with Gavin. Just to let people know, if you haven't been to these before, if you've got any comments or questions you want to put to Gavin, just put them in the chat, and I will pick those out as we go along. So please just put them in there. Just to make people aware, we do record this and it goes on our YouTube channel, so it will be posted on the internet afterwards. Yeah, just feel free to pop things in the chat, and we'll just come to them as and when we can. So yeah, I mean, just to kick off, Gavin, it'd be great if you could, just to give people a sense of who you are. It'd be great if you could say a bit about why you joined the police and what your journey's been from then to where you are now.
Yeah, no, well, morning, Rick. Morning, everybody. I mean, the first thing I should say is I've thoroughly enjoyed every minute that I've spent in policing, and I often think that if I could go back and start again tomorrow, then I would, and I'd probably choose a whole load of different things to do. But the person that I've really got to thank for it is my mate Andy from school. So we grew up in Hartlepool on the northeast coast. Had a great sort of childhood up there, upbringing, but of course it wasn't a sort of prosperous time for the northeast in the 1970s, and a lot of my mates didn't really know what they were going to do. I went off to uni to study engineering at Cambridge. Andy went off to do civil engineering, but didn't enjoy it and joined the police, followed in his dad's footsteps. And I had a couple of years of listening to all Andy's stories, and I thought this sounds way more exciting than engineering. and that was that really. So joined Cambridge Constabulary. Stayed there because my late wife Sarah was doing a teacher training conversion course there, so she was teaching in the area. I started policing in Cambridgeshire, and then transferred down to Surrey as a constable when we got married. And Surrey was a wonderful force to work in. Did every rank there, but some steps out. International work, and one of those in particular really shaped my thoughts about policing, and that was working on what was called the National Reassurance Policing Programme, effectively a neighbourhood policing guarantee, which is what we've got back again now. So done lots of things, professional standards, serious and organised crime, but if I was to have a real passion about policing, it would be neighbourhood policing.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting actually, because I think sometimes often neighbourhood policing is seen as being the kind of, I don't know what you call it, like the Cinderella service, or the bit of policing that gets thought about sort of after everything else. But you've long had this passion for it. I mean, what is it about neighbourhood policing that really inspires you and motivates you?
Well, I think I suppose reflecting back to the childhood I had in the northeast and the sense of community I had there, a place where sort of people pulled together and looked after each other, and even if you didn't have a great deal of money, you could always help each other out and get through the sort of tough times. A real strong sense of community. When I joined policing, I realised actually that for a lot of people that's not their day-to-day experience, and that they often live in very difficult circumstances where they're not able to thrive and feel safe in the area where they live. And particularly through the national reassurance work, where we worked across 8 different force areas, we had 16 trial sites. That was my realization that policing can be a real catalyst for change in local communities, that we can have control over crime, that we can give a sense of order and safety, and from that flows much greater benefits in terms of being able to bring offenders to justice, get community intelligence, see businesses prosper. Interestingly, we did a study through Professor Paul Taylor, our Chief Scientific Advisor recently. Paul's been working with a series of universities to try and demonstrate what's the value to the UK economy from good policing, and cut a long story short, for £1 in, £4 out in housing stock value. So so this sort of instinctive notion I had that policing could be a force for good, and not just in terms of safety and feelings of safety, but in terms of local prosperity, turns out is borne out in a bit of evidence as well, which is great.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, let's talk a bit about the NPCC then. So it's the 10th anniversary. I mean, what would you say has characterized the period of those 10 years? I mean, what, over that period, what's happened, and what role has the NPCC played from a policing perspective over those 10 years?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to reflect back and realise the sort of origins of NPCC, which is the last time there was a bit of a clearing out of different government bodies, and a slimming down of central authorities and government, and National Police and Improvement Agency came to an end. ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers, came to an end, and there was a whole discussion about what should the design be, and something called the Parker Review. It's worth looking back at. And it was interesting at the time as to what was going to end up in National Police Chiefs Council and what would end up in the college. It started on a mission of bringing forces together, and my predecessors have really developed it into a really strong brand and force for good around three things, really. So encouraging coordination of policing, particularly in response to operational scenarios, and we do that not just domestically but internationally as well, for all of our UK policing interests overseas, and then domestically in things like the violent disorder last summer. The work of NPCC plays a central coordinating resource in that. The second thing is collaboration. I think this is a harder challenge, and I guess a reflection on the last decade or so. I would probably say we've, in hindsight, been less successful at that across the policing system. There is a legal basis for collaboration. In fact, we exist under a collaboration agreement, of which there are over 100 signatories. But it's hard work trying to encourage voluntary collaboration. I mean, when we do it well, we do it amazingly, but it's not common enough. And then the third thing really is to be a voice for policing, to be able to communicate about UK policing's interests, to be able to advocate for change. And I think we're central to advocating for reform at the moment. And I'm ever so grateful for Sarah Thornton, for Martin Hewitt, for putting us on a strong platform in NCC and NPCC. I think Sarah really established it as a force for good. Martin, of course, had the pandemic, and for a big part of his tenureship, but really established a strong core. It grew under Martin's leadership to give us much stronger capability. And when you stand for election for this role, you sort of put a little manifesto together, and in a way, I stood on a ticket of reform that, I thought that we're at a point in history where policing really needs to look deliberately at how we're designed and how we're organised.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about that then. I mean, what so police reform. I mean, maybe I'll just say what I think that is, and then we can get into the nuts and bolts of it. I mean, so the Home Secretary announced in November in her speech to the APCC NPCC summit a number of different legs of reform, at the core of which I think is this concept of the National Centre of Policing, which the government's committed to. Though there are some other elements. Obviously, there's the neighbourhood policing guarantee that they're rolling out, and there's other elements alongside around efficiencies and so on. But but that National Centre of Policing really is at the sort of core of it, I think. So what does the NPCC want to see from reform? I mean, why do you think it's necessary, and what are the kind of things you'd like to see come out of it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are 5 clear things that we're looking for, but perhaps before we get to those, I'll answer that question there, Rick, that you said about why do we think it's necessary? Because it's not some sort of academic or theoretical exercise, this, and I think if we got to the point where we were just shuffling things around, that wouldn't serve our communities well. And I come back to where I started about my sort of core beliefs about policing, and if what we're doing is not making people safer or not making them feel safer or enabling them to lead better lives, then there's no point in doing it. And I strongly believe that the things that we're advocating for will help us do that for years into the future. So the reasons why are that I think we're all increasingly finding that we're running hard to keep up. If you walk into any police station in any corner of the Four Nations and talk to them about how it feels to manage their workloads, manage the broad range of community need, how the type of criminality is changing, 50% probably plus of crime now online. 90% of plus crime got a digital footprint or element to it. Things are changing rapidly. And policing has to change rapidly in order to keep up. And the current structure does not make us agile enough to do that. So that's one thing, keeping pace with criminality in order to keep communities safe. The second thing is, can we afford the existing system? So in financial resilience terms, and we do surveys with all forces, we know we fall a long way short of being able to afford the current system, and people will, describe that in the everyday problems, whether they're able to replenish kit and equipment, whether they're working in decent buildings, whether they've got colleagues sitting alongside them or they're holding vacancies. And then there's thousands of police staff vacancies across the country, and police officers occupying those vacancies that should be done by police staff. So we're financially stretched and not as resilient as we could be. And then there's a confusion about the direction of policing, who gets to choose. And this, of course, is part of deliberate design. We've had 10 years of effectively a very devolved policing model, with the very good intent, I think, at the time that that devolved model would serve local communities well and would come together and collaborate where necessary. But I think what's happened is that we've not been able to collaborate at the pace necessary to keep up with the threats to community. So they're the sort of key drivers that I see. And fundamentally, the design of UK policing is based on a Royal Commission that was effectively a post-Second World War exercise in the early 1960s. And those who were on the Royal Commission at the time and gave evidence to it could not for 1 minute have imagined what society would be like today here in 2025. And then perhaps the final point I'd say, before maybe pausing for thought and what it is that we want to see from reform, is that when we look internationally, and I had a really interesting session with colleagues from the Netherlands earlier in the week who came across to sign a joint agreement with us on collaboration on scientific advancement in policing. Was when we look at international models, many of our colleagues have thought about this and made a start on making changes to a system of policing that's better able to cope with the modern world. And I think there are plenty of international lessons that we can learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I actually have a copy of the Royal Commission report down here, actually. And one of the interesting things about it is there was a dissenting opinion in that, and the dissenting opinion was the guy who said, actually, we need a royal police service for England and Wales, and that was it. So
Okay.
he basically came out and issued a minority report which said, okay, they're saying go for this sort of 43 structure, or this sort of fewer forces than they previously had. But he said, well, actually, maybe we should just have one. And it was quite interesting when you read it that at the time they were talking about one of the biggest drivers they were talking about was the creation of the motorway network, which kind of tells you tells you something that this was a model created before we really had motorways, never mind before the internet.
Well, I mean, I looked it up before the pocket calculator, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a completely different world. But in a way, the motorways it's a means of communication, isn't it? And if you think of the means of communication deployed by criminality now, how that's encrypted, how you're able to hide criminality from policing and law enforcement, how we're trying to disrupt that activity. It's just a sort of next generation of similar challenge, really, and we've got to gear ourselves to do that. And we've really got to get sort of purposeful and deliberate about this, because if we don't, I am fearful that we'll get left behind.
Yeah, absolutely. I should point out to people that my colleague Nicole has posted in the chat an invitation from the Joint Police Reform team, which is starting work on police reform. And there's a QR code there. And basically, they're asking for your views. So if people want to feed in views on police reform and the direction it should take, just go to that that QR code, and you can put in some feedback there. So please do take that up, because I think the team are really keen to hear from people. So yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about what you'd like to see then, Gavin.
Yeah.
In terms of what are the core things that you're looking for?
Yeah, so I guess maybe if I come at this problem from talking about the type of criminality that we're trying to tackle, the technology that we need to do so, and the workforce that will equip us well for that. And I think if we think of those three things, what is it that we're trying to tackle? What do we need in our armory to do so, and what's the sort of workforce plan for the future? That's a sort of useful way of looking at it, I think. And then there's, I guess, 5 key things that underpin those, which I'll try and link them back to those themes. The first is a stronger national centre. So this is, the Home Secretary announced this at the summit last year. Home Secretary called it a National Centre for Policing. In my address, I called it a National Policing Directorate, quite deliberately, and I'll maybe say a little bit more about that. But if we just did that on its own, I don't think it would be sufficient to make us successful. So the second thing is, and we've spoken about it, how the money works. At the moment, most of the money in policing flows locally, except, for example, in counter-terrorism. And then we have to negotiate back to the centre if we want to collaborate on core activities. The third thing is who gets to decide. And that can be who gets to decide on big things like what's the workforce strategy. Should we be tied to a target of officer numbers? Should we have a more modern workforce, better able to meet the threats of the future? So on big things like that, technology programs, but also at the local level, who gets to decide? Where's the community voice and so on? And I think there's some gaps and overlaps in the governance that doesn't set as well to be agile. Fourth thing, where should we structure our capabilities? And there is a geography question in this, and a big design question. So at the moment, we're structured many national organisations, regional organisations or regional collaborations, and many more local footprints. I think this is where the international comparisons are useful, because we see a couple of models. We see strong national organisation and big regional footprints, strategic forces, if you like. Or we see single entities, Police Scotland, for example, or we see 3-tier models, which is, in a way, if you had a strong national centre, you could have strong regional footprints, and then a local force model as we know it. But where do you bring your capability together? And we're increasingly finding, particularly in the technical space, that the sort of new capabilities that we need in serious organised crime are the same as in counter-terrorism, by and large, just tackling a different threat. If you look at things like misinformation, disinformation, online exploitation, fraud and financial crime, keeping our cyber security resilient. These are things that just need to be done once for everybody. So how you structure your capabilities is the fourth thing. And then the fifth thing is how do we sort of re-energize the thing that I'm most passionate about, that local level of policing, so that it becomes a true shared partnership endeavour. Particularly when you look at the volume of demand coming into police contact centres, and the fact that most of it is not directly related to crime. It's a much broader issue of community need that we need to work with others on. So 5 things: national centre, how the money flows, who gets to decide, where you structure your capabilities, and how do we re-energise the local. That, for me, is a package on reform that will help us get a more modern workforce for the future, technology that's better able to combat criminality, and be successful in that fundamental challenge of keeping communities safe and keeping them feeling safe against a modern range of threats, which are not traditionally what we've seen for probably the first half of my service.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, that's a brilliant overview of the agenda. And maybe let's start at the local and talk a bit about that. And the question I had there was about so you were involved in the National Reassurance Programme and all of that that kicked off in the kind of 2000s. But obviously we're in a bit of a different world now, not least sort of financially and in many other senses as well. How do you think neighbourhood policing in the 2020s is going to look different to the kind of neighbourhood policing we saw back in the 2000s?
Yeah, and here I'll give a plug for a Police Foundation report that Andy Higgins's work on modernising neighbourhood policing, I think, is a really good read, and there's some sort of key lessons in there that came from some of Andy's interviews, I think, from neighbourhood officers, about the nature of what neighbourhood policing is and how it adds value, and how it is different from the sort of casework of public protection or dealing with troubled families and so on, and how you garner broader community support, build on the natural resources that exist in all communities wherever they are, to work with policing to help keep their own area safe. So I think that's the fundamental thing that neighbourhood policing can help with, is to be a catalyst for problem solving, to show people that you can take back control in whatever method is needed. And of course that's going to be very different in a dense urban environment than it is in a rural community. But I think all communities will say that they want police to take control back of their area from criminality. And I think where we demonstrate that we can do so, communities begin to rally round and give you their time and effort as well, and their sort of confidence to help. So that's one dynamic of it. The other dynamic of it is to work across sort of broader partnerships, health and education and so on, to make sure that the right resources are dealing with the right problems. So probably the best example of this in recent years is the right care, right person. What's the care that's needed and who's the best agency to give it? And of course, we've done that in mental health, but there are many other aspects of local regeneration where the police are not best suited to deal with things. But we can help with the communication. We can help make connections. We can play a part on a problem-solving group that's led by somebody else. But fundamentally, you need a presence to do that. Clearly, we've got a government that wants to reinvest in that presence. We saw a lot of it degrade away during the years of austerity. So there is a process beginning to build it back. And I think in these next few years, it's important that we don't take ownership of everything, because sometimes we're good at doing that. We like to be helpful and we like to play our part, but sometimes we take too much ownership. But we can play an active role in helping others take ownership for problems that are really they've got the skills to solve. And then perhaps the other thing I think is changed is that a big driver for neighbourhood policing was to help build back confidence, the currency on which we trade. And the reassurance work started from this question about why is it that you can live in an area that's objectively safe, but you don't necessarily feel safe. The reassurance gap, that's where it came, that's where it came from. And of course, all the evidence points to, good quality problem solving will help you get through that. But we also now live in a world where some of the drivers of how people feel is online misinformation, disinformation, polarization of views, sometimes perpetrated by people in positions of really significant influence. and a neighbourhood officer of the future, supported by their communications team, have got to be equally adept at managing the message and the communication as they have at solving the problem. Because sometimes in the current world, people are just not convinced that we've done it, or it's as it is as it's presented. So all sorts of research going on how we deal with misinformation and disinformation, how we become a trusted voice to help build back that confidence.
Yeah, brilliant. And if anyone's interested in that report actually that Andy Higgins did, it's called The Future of Neighbourhood Policing, and it's on the Police Foundation website. My colleague Nicole, if she's able to, will maybe could put a link in the chat so people could look at it, because Andy did a lot of talking to neighbourhood officers around the country, and the whole point was to think about, well, what's happened to neighbourhood policing and where might it go next. And so I think that's a useful primer on some of this stuff. And in terms of the sort of national, in terms of the national centre, and obviously this is the sort of core of it. I mean, what do you know? Well, I mean, one way of approaching this is to ask, what if you have a stronger national centre? I mean, what does that mean for the NPCC actually? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of where does it leave the NPCC? Because in some ways, in our system, because we didn't have a national centre, we first of all had ACPO, kind of almost like trying to become a bit of a national centre, and then you had the Theresa May reforms, creation of the NPCC, etc. So where does it leave the NPCC as part of that kind of landscape?
Yeah, well, I think the first question is what do we want the national centre to do? What's the purpose of this thing? And I think it needs to do three things. It needs to provide some strategic leadership for UK policing, and that's the big things like leading on comprehensive spending review submissions based on really good data, evidence, and research, setting out a 10-year workforce strategy that not only recognises the importance of officer numbers, but the fact that we need a whole range of operational police staff colleagues that don't currently have the prominence in a national workforce strategy, and not often recognised politically. We have the sort of political headlines about officer numbers, but that's not going to serve as well into the years in the future. I mean, we need investment in officer numbers, but we need a modern workforce. Different routes of entry, the ability to attract in specialist skills for people to retain in service, to have portfolio careers within policing. So long-term workforce strategies to lead on the really important things like pay and pensions, and do it once for everybody. We don't all need sort of pension scheme managers and so on. So there are some things like that, some strategic functions, some enabling functions, and of course there are some big operational services elsewhere in the system that have struggled in the current model. So National Police Service, forensics, they've had troubled recent histories, and I think the ability to bring those together under understandable central leadership, not under a sort of distributed model, would give us a strong sort of guiding centre that's setting strategic direction, that's providing enabling services like some of those I've mentioned, and is providing some key operational functions. And there are plenty of these things. So, for example, at the moment, there's something like £300 million of Home Office grant agreements that go out to provide these national services that are often hosted within local police and crime commissioners' offices or local forces. And at the moment, we have a queue of 22 of these functions who want to come back to the centre, who want to be part of a more coordinated sort of endeavour. So I think it'd be pretty powerful to have that centre, provided it's got powers. And I've spoken quite a bit to colleagues who were involved in the setup and the stand down of National Policing Improvement Agency. I remember one colleague saying to me it should have just been the National Policing Agency, and it probably had many of the right components to it, but it didn't have any power. It didn't have any power to ensure the consistency. So that's the sort of second point about who gets to decide. So making sure that we've got strong governance in that helps set the sort of direction for UK policing, I think is really, really, really important.
Yeah, great. And what I mean, just And in response to that, what do you think that, in terms of the support there is for this within the system among your colleagues,
Yeah.
how would you describe that? Because in the past, obviously, some people will have said, "Oh, a stronger national centre means, less power at the local level, and maybe it means, chief constables giving up a bit of power, as well as police and crime commissioners." I mean, how would you judge the mood among your colleagues around this? I mean, are they basically up for this and actually and want
Yeah.
to sort of make it work?
Yeah, I mean, it is a redistribution of power, but it's done so with the intent of better equipping our local colleagues to succeed. You know, so what's always in my mind is to come back to that sort of neighbourhood policing team, and are we putting in their hands the tools, the insight, the technical capability to enable them to solve problems, bring offenders to justice, get more justice for more victims in a sort of swift and efficient way. And I mean, you only have to look at how these colleagues are, wrestling with digital evidence and wrestling with, really difficult systems to get analysis and insight, get cases before court where it might manifest itself locally, but there might be connections across the UK, internationally. This is tough stuff now, so we need to better equip them. So yes, there is a sort of a ceding of power from some of the local decision making in order to get nationally effective, capable systems and better kit and equipment for our local teams. But I think it will serve as well. In terms of the mood of Chiefs Council, I mean, it's probably fair to say over the course of the last a couple of years that we've been debating this, that we've clearly developed our thinking. I know the reform team are always looking for feedback, and we had a good debate at last Chief Constables Council meeting just last month, where the team set out some of their early thoughts on what a national centre could look like, what sort of functions it would have. And actually, for everybody that was present in the room, they were like, "Yeah, we can see that. We support the direction of travel, but of course, it'll be in the detail, won't it?" And again, talking to international colleagues, one of the things that they've sort of counselled me on is time spent thinking about where the power rests, who gets to decide, is time well spent. And in particular, I remember a conversation with colleagues from Norway that talked about that occupied most of their parliamentary time to make sure the checks and balances that were in the right place, and you're not concentrating too much power in too small a place, and that people who are in receipt of these services also get a say on how they're structured and made up. So really important debate, as is, and we're trying to do a little bit of this now, build cross-party consensus, because this shouldn't be a political issue. The safety and security of the UK and the safety and security of our community shouldn't be a party political issue. It should be something where we can try and build a consensus about what we need as a nation, as a collection of nations, to keep ourselves safe into the future in an increasingly uncertain world.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well, that's really that's really encouraging to hear the level of support that there is. And what do you? I mean, one element of reform which I think is which we haven't touched on so much yet, but just be interested in your views on it, is the whole thing around sort of performance and standards and so on. Because, so the Home Office is now, we've been through this period in which Home Office very much pulled out of doing kind of performance management of policing. We're now moving back into a space where it's, sees the Home Office as setting some clear goals and monitoring, how well the system's doing in relation to those. At the same time, I mean, you'll have lived through different phases of all of this, because I'm sure when in the 2000s, you'll remember all the targets and everything that was around at that time. I mean, what do you sort of, are there things that you would have say we need to learn from that previous period for now? Now we're constructing a new kind of performance regime. Are there things we need to think about so we don't, maybe make some mistakes which we made in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, we definitely don't want to sort of hit the target and miss the point, do we? And of course, there are many public scandals, some very prominent still in society today. about abuse of vulnerable people, where policing's eye was turned towards other challenges and wasn't focused strongly enough on that. So we definitely don't want a scenario where targets draw us towards missing the point of community safety. So any performance arrangement needs to be balanced across the range of threats. That's the first thing I'd say, and to make some conscious choices, because unless we want to invest significantly, and I mean massively significantly, in policing in the United Kingdom, which is of course, it is a choice for governments if they want to do that, but I don't sense the sort of fiscal environment is going to allow that. Then we have to make choices, because it is just not possible to deal completely with the range of threats that we've got. But we can make a massive impact. We can have effect, but you've got to choose where you want to have effect. But not to the extent where you're leaving people really sort of vulnerable and unattended for. The next thing I'd say about a performance regime is that it can't just be about the results that we achieve, as important as they are. It has to include things like the health of our workforce, the fitness and capability of our infrastructure and kit and equipment, because we've got to dispel this myth that sometimes perpetuates that the reason that we're not succeeding is just because policing is not working hard enough, or it's not concentrating on the right things. I've never met a colleague in policing who was not rushed off their feet. Working round the clock, often putting in an extraordinary amount of discretionary effort. I've often thought that discretionary effort is the thing that really drives policing. The vast majority of colleagues put in way more than they're paid for, and that's not often recognised. It's just, back to where we started, in a way we're not equipping ourselves well in the way that we're designed and structured to enable people to succeed as efficiently as they could be. We openly admit there's a lot of inefficiency, a lot of lack of productivity in what we do, but that's not down to the brilliant people. That's down to the fact that we don't have the investment in the new capabilities that we need, and we don't have the flexible workforce. Just a practical example of that: if there's no capital investment in this next comprehensive spending review, local policing will have gone without any capital investment for a decade. You cannot keep any big organisation that employs nigh on 250,000 people well serviced without local capital investment. People are just stacking up borrowing and stacking up debt. So back to the performance regime, as well as the sort of outcomes that we're getting for people, the health of the workforce, the fitness of our technology and estate, and the financial resilience that we've got as well. All of those are things that need to be monitored and kept in balance to keep it a healthy organisation.
No, really, really helpful. We got some good. Actually, there's one question which is sort of related to that from Yvonne, where she says, Pillar 5 of the National Policing Vision aims to embed a culture of continuous improvement and innovation in policing. The Home Office recently advertised for a head of police improvement. The college has improvement capabilities lead. HMI CFRS are looking at continuous improvement. So the question is, looking to the future, will NPCC consider a national lead for continuous improvement to help strategic and systematic alignment and oversight to drive national policing improvement priorities? So is that the kind of thing you might sort of consider?
Yeah, so I think we didn't touch on it when we were talking about the National Centre, but one of the current gaps in the system is the capacity to help people improve. Now, there's some there, colleagues in the college have got some of that, but it's limited in scope. And of course, when we get forces that go into the engage process or enhanced monitoring, we do try and rally round and with everything that's available within the college and within NPCC portfolios, help people in whatever way we can. on that improvement, but it's not all coordinated in one place. And in fact, I've spoken to Ian Kaplan at the Home Office, who's heading up the new Police Performance Standards Unit, to really advocate, and this is starting to happen because they're recruiting for roles now, that new unit is formed not just of colleagues in the Home Office, but colleagues from policing, from the college, from the inspectorate, and so on. So that improvement thing becomes a shared endeavour. And I would definitely see a new national centre for policing having a strong improvement capability. And I think we're increasingly finding where forces need to improve. It's not because they don't know what to do or they haven't got a good strong plan around public protection or whatever. It's that some of the underlying systems are not serving them well.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start digging, you'll find it's there's some technical coding issues and there's maybe some skills gap issues, and it'll be a range of things that means colleagues are not well served, and any improvement capability like that needs to be, again, multi-skilled, multifaceted, not just subject matter experts in whatever the threat area is.
Yeah, and one of the things people often say to me when I'm talking about I'm talking about accountability in policing. One of the things that people often say is often chiefs will say, we've never been more accountable. I mean, we're almost, and often they will express a frustration that there's almost maybe it's not too much accountability, but there's lots of different types of accountability. So they're accountable to lots of different people for lots of different things.
Yes.
And I just wondered what you think about that in the context of reform. And I don't pretend to have an answer to it, but it's something I've been trying to think about. Is clearly, police need to be held to account, both as individuals in the course of their duties, and also strategically in terms of the people running the organisations and so on. But if you have a system that's very, very complicated, in some ways that you don't actually get good accountability, because you end up with people sort of not able to know what is the priority, because I've got the PCC saying something, I've got the Home Office saying something, I've got HMIC telling me I need to improve this, that, and the other. I've got some IOPC recommendations that have come back. I mean, what? And then you've got the media coming in with just the day-to-day. Why aren't you doing enough on shoplifting? Why, how? I mean, just wonder what your thoughts are on that in terms of, do we need to have a bit of a think about, the range and nature of the way accountability is set up in this system?
Yeah, well, first, let me add to that little list and say you've also got Ofsted for apprenticeship stuff. You've got forensic regulations. You've got coronial recommendations. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, local chiefs will say there's probably not a week goes by in force when you haven't got somebody in from some agency inspecting what you're doing on some aspect of the plan. I mean, it's a sort of permanent feature. Often we set officers aside and computer terminals ready for whoever the latest round is coming in to do that. So that's just a sort of feature of the modern world. I think that there's plenty of people checking what we're doing. It's absolutely right that policing should be held to account, should be open, transparent, but does feel a little out of balance at the moment. I think one thing that would really help is for the world of audit and inspection to keep pace with the change in global threats and challenges in the way that I'm describing that I want policing to. So I'll give an example of that, like end-to-end processes, so take the criminal justice process, an end-to-end inspection of justice, I think would probably give much more insight to whether we're doing our bit well. An end-to-end inspection of how policing, health, social care all come together to deal with some of these difficult community issues, sometimes that result in death or serious injury, for example, where there's multiple agencies crossing over. That would be helpful as well. And the other question in that is where the accountability lies. And I do think we're starting to see some shifts. We've got the accountability review to recognise that in the world we live in, sometimes it's no longer really fair for when you get big systematic failings for the end result of that to rest on the shoulders of one individual who at the time might have been trying to do the right thing in extraordinarily difficult circumstances, and helping us find audit and accountability systems in future that place the responsibility on the organisation and the leaders of the organisation to have safe practices of work and so on. I think are really, really, really important. I think, back to the question about continuous improvement, looking at those industries where it is genuinely a search for what are the systematic changes that need to be made for prevention and improvement, rather than who was in the hot seat and who made that really tough decision at the time. We have to shift some of that, because that does feel out of balance at the moment.
Yeah, no, really, really, really interesting. And I should just say, if anyone has any other questions, do, because Gavin and I are happily sort of chatting away, and we could do that for the next 15 minutes. But if you've got any questions, do put them in the chat. I see Anthony's put in a very nice comment about the strategic review of policing, which is more or less just teeing us up to say how wonderful the Police Foundation is, but which is very kind of you, Anthony. But I hope, I mean, well, I don't know if you agree, Gavin. I mean, the work we did on the strategic review was trying to raise some of these issues,
yeah.
and hopefully, it has made a contribution to this debate.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think one of the things as we sort of enter into this reform debate over the coming weeks and months, I think, is to keep bringing ourselves back to the core purpose of what we're trying to do. And I think the strong prevention message and focus that came through the strategic review is really, really important for us as well. We absolutely must resist just the shuffling round of arrangements, and in everything that we do, think about, is it making people safer? Is it making people feel safer? And I think that sort of strong prevention message in the review was very, 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 very helpful. Again, back to the sort of international comparison, I think looking at some of where colleagues have been able to get much sort of stronger outcomes, think about what outcomes we're trying to drive, also important. So I suppose, linking back to the accountability question, who's responsible for what? I mean, the way I could see it in future is that we have a stronger national strategy. The Home Office, the Home Secretary setting a stronger national expectation for policing. I mean, we have a strategic policing requirement at the moment, but it's a have regard to document as a local policing planners, because that's then got some democratic mandate to it. If we are making difficult choices about what policing concentrates on and doesn't concentrate on, it's done with that democratic mandate. That will give us a clear framework to operate in, but also to invest against. Because where there's money limited, we need to invest in the capabilities against whatever the strategy is. And then at the local level, I do believe it's the sort of voice of the community that really matters. I think we know that if we're to build confidence, we need to concentrate on the problems that are concerning people the most. And anybody watching the news this morning would have seen a brilliant example of that with colleagues in National Crime Agency and Greater Manchester Police and others, really, getting on top of illegal trade and money laundering in local communities. Exactly the sort of thing that really effective neighbourhood policing, working in partnership with organised crime teams and national agencies, can have an effect on. And I think I saw a trading standards colleague in there as well, and immigration, just a great example of the sort of partnership working we were talking about earlier on.
Yeah, and Claire's asked, it's probably a bit unfair to ask Gavin this, because it's what the view of the APCC is on all of this. But I mean, I think maybe let me put it like this: is there, what do you say to PCCs, for example, who might say, because clearly the previous reform effort was very much aimed at creating PCCs, and it was very much about local devolution. This is about there is some rebalancing here in terms of thinking about, new capabilities at a national level and so on. And what do you say to PCCs who might sort of be concerned about that, about, what their role is going to be as the representatives of local community and if you like, the ability of local communities to set their own priorities for local policing? I mean, how do you see that working in these future arrangements?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Claire, for the question. I'll declare as well. Claire and I used to work together as well, so
All right.
thanks for dialing in, Claire. Great to see you online. So the Joint Reform Team has got a colleague in there from Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. So this is a sort of shared endeavour. As with, we talked about the range of views of chiefs earlier. I think there's a different range of views across police and crime commissioners. I think the one thing that's really important for policing is that we get, and colleagues have used this phrase, we get a deliberate design for the future of policing. And of course, running alongside this, we've got the devolution debate as well, haven't we? Which is changing the geography of local democracy. But much needed for other drivers. But the drivers that are driving us towards police reform mean that we shouldn't just be, I suppose, led by the nose of a devolution debate, because then we might end up with a design of policing that also doesn't meet the challenges that I've described. That would, to me, feel like just a sort of shuffling round. So I think working with colleagues across police and crime commissioners to sort of build this consensus about what it is that we need to keep our communities safe into the future, and how that means capabilities at a national and potential regional level is as important as what the local footprint is. I think you'd also get some colleagues who would describe quite vividly the benefits of the mayoral model, where the mayoral model has been able to join up at that local level the range of agencies against community issues, and for policing to feel like they're part of that, and not always having to be the lead catalyst. There's some really interesting stories for colleagues that have been working under mayoral models, and of course we're going to see more of that. I mean, these are exactly the sort of things that need debate time, and no doubt going to be discussions in Parliament. And but I think the thing that I just keep coming back to for policing is that we need a deliberate design for policing to make sure that we can succeed in policing as an endeavour, and not to solely be swept up in other change programmes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because there's a lot going on, and as you say, there's a risk that you sort of you end up with a structure which falls out of other reforms in other places, rather than thinking about where policing needs to go. Alison has a question on this. Seems to be a swing that happens between high harm and high volume crime as priorities. You mentioned the need to make choices rather than to try to do everything, but do we have the intel we need to make those choices?
Well, that's one area actually where I'm increasingly optimistic for the future with where the technology is going through sort of big data science and insights. There's some incredibly exciting technology partners that are able to do things that we could, never really have imagined before. I mean, one particular product that I saw demonstrated last year, demonstrated by some police colleague analysts that had been using it for a while, talked about being able to do things that previously just wouldn't have been humanly possible for an analyst to do in the time available, or other things that were a push of a button that may have been 10 days work before. So the sort of insight that we're able to get is quite exciting. And of course, that's the sort of capability that we need in the hands of everybody, not just in a select few. And I think where that will lead us is to a couple of places. One, where are the weaknesses in the system that need much stronger prevention interventions, which might be with industry, within the design of our infrastructure and town centres, with the design of products. So if I was to call one out at the moment, e-scooters and e-bikes, and probably brilliant for the future of the planet in terms of environment and so on, but an absolute menace for crime and criminality at the moment. How is it that we redesign that infrastructure, the e-bike electronic, the sort of small motor transport infrastructure to make it a good thing for the planet and a bad thing for crime. That's a big prevention design question, isn't it? So I think it'll give us insight into things like that, where we can work with industry. And I think it'll also give us a stronger focus on the organisers, who's pulling the strings behind these criminal networks. So we can intervene sort of further up the chain and have a much stronger effect. And there's a bit of a lesson in this, in where the NCA have been taking activity, upstream, overseas, online. And if spoke recently about the brilliant drama Adolescence, about the threat that our young people are facing day in, day out. In fact, I was talking to a colleague just earlier this week who was telling me that amongst year 6 pupils, the extreme violence videos that were circulating on year 6. I mean, so how we intervene in online safety is going to have a massive impact on the volume, because if just following that argument through, if we don't get a control of the online environment, what is that doing to the minds of our young people and their attitudes towards domestic violence for the future, for example, which then becomes volume violent activity that policing has to deal with. So I think some of the technology and insight for the future will help us in get a route into this. And just to finish that point on the online harms, I said this at a police and industry event recently, it's an engineering problem. This was engineered in. We, human beings, society, engineered this problem in, and we can engineer it out. Now, it might need stronger legislation, it might need stronger regulation, it might need greater willpower from us all, but it can be engineered out, and we've got to do it. We've got to do it with some urgency.
Yeah, that's really, that's really interesting. And hopefully, with the reform, if you do have some stronger national, because that's important, isn't it? Because if you don't have, you can't have 43 police forces trying to influence, tech giants in Silicon Valley. You've got to have a coordinated approach, don't you?
Exactly that. Yeah, and increasingly internationally, because we're working in international markets, aren't we? So
yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, I'm sorry, everybody. All these questions have come in, and now we've run out of time. But so apologies to those who've asked those late questions. But I hope you'll agree we've had a really excellent discussion with Gavin. I mean, we've just covered a huge amount in a very short period, but it's been, I've learned a lot in this conversation, and we're really grateful, Gavin, for your time this morning. So thank you very much. We started with engineering, you doing an engineering degree at Cambridge. We've ended with engineering, so that's obviously a big strand in your life that's sort of that you follow through.
Yeah, no, well, thanks ever so much for hosting, Rick. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks to everybody for dialing in and taking the time out.
Yeah, brilliant. And do take the time to click on that or go into that QR code and give some comments to the police reform team now they've started work on this. And if you've got further thoughts, given what we've been discussing, then do feed them through that channel, because it will go straight to the people who are involved in this design work. So so that'd be great. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks to Gavin. Happy anniversary to the NPCC, and have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks all.